Welcome to our first podcast for First Attendance. We're going to invite some guests over the next few weeks to come and discuss their trades and how we as a business can actually help you guys as customers guide yourself through the actual pitfalls of fire safety within the business. Today, I'm pleased to introduce Steve. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Paul. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, mate?
Surviving.
Busy?
Very busy, extremely.
Awesome. Right, so Steve's here to talk about risk assessments today. I've been in the trade for 20 years. I've met many risk assessors along the way, and there's lots of different opinions out there. So what we're going to try and do today is get rid of all the cloudy stuff and actually give you guys as customers all the information you need on where to find a good risk assessor, what they should actually be looking for, and what sort of things should be actually in the risk assessment once you've received that document. So, Steve, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself to start with? Where you've come from, what you do, how you got into the trade?
Oh, interesting question. Okay, how did I end up doing this? So, my background was, originally, I was a retained firefighter with a company that had their own fire crews. I then left and became a health and safety specialist. Kind of bored me a little bit. Wasn't really what I challenged. I kind of liked fire. I know that sounds a bit weird, but I did like why fires start and how they spread through a building. So I then went on to become a fire and safety consultant. I've worked for several big companies in the past who are mostly fire extinguishers, servicing or producers. Didn't find it quite challenging enough. And 22 years ago, I broke away and became self-employed before I became a limited company. And in total, in the fire industry, I've been in it for 31 years this
31
year.
years.
31 years. That's why I've gone grey early. But a lot has changed within the industry within the last 10 years. And it's challenging. A lot of it, I like what's gone on because without being too crude, it does separate the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah.
And I'm going to help you today to identify what you should be looking for within your risk assessment and what kind of persons you should be employing to do the risk assessments for you.
So you've seen many changes from the regulatory reform fire safety order come into effect. And
the issue was, prior to that, there was a thing called the Fire Precautions Workplace Act. And it was a law brought in to kind of take up the slack where a fire certificate would stop. So you had to have 25 people or more, it'd be a larger company or a hotel, before a fire officer would get involved and then issue a fire certificate. And there was a grey area for companies that were employing 5 or less people. And it was a grey area, so they brought the Fire Precautions Workplace Act. But there was huge issues with it. And one of the big issues was the word should kept appearing.
right.
You've got children, Paul?
Yes.
And you tell them you should do something?
Yes.
Do they always do it?
No.
And that was the problem with the old legislation. What happened then, and then the government realised what the issues were, is in 2005, which then got issued in 2006, became what we now know as the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005. And instead of the word in the use should, we have must and ensure.
Right, okay.
And everything within that legal document is a legal requirement to undertake.
Right, okay. So when it comes to businesses now then, the grey area to start with a lot of customers out there is when or at what stage as their business grows do they need to have a risk assessment in place?
So, big law change.
Right.
You don't have to employ 5 or more people anymore.
Right, okay.
If you employ one person and you have a business,
Yeah.
you need to have a fire risk assessment undertaken.
Right, okay. Okay.
So that is a big legal change.
Yeah.
Because there, again, we've gone back to having grey areas. You had to have 5 or more employees.
Yeah.
Well, if you had 4, you didn't necessarily need to undertake a fire risk
5
assessment.
used to be the magic number in health and safety.
It used to be.
Yeah.
And, you know, same with fire training. If you had 5 or more employees, you had to legally undertake fire training. So that was the requirement. The recent changes now state there is no
And it doesn't matter what type of business you've got, whether it be a shop owner or...
Whatever business, even, and this is where the confusion comes in, I get with a lot of landlords regarding domestic rented properties, the communal escape route always came within the Fire Safety Order 2005.
Yeah.
So when I turn up to properties now and say to them, look, you've always had to do this, and they say, since when? And I say, since about 19 years ago.
Yeah.
This communal area has always been part under fire safety law because it's a primary escape route.
Now, within the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, they talk about responsible person.
Correct.
So that responsible person in that sort of circumstance, would that be the landlord, the building management company, who should actually get that risk assessment done?
Okay, so it could be the CEO or the director of a business. It could be a freeholder, a leaseholder, or even a management company regarding domestic rented properties.
Okay. And who decides who that responsible person should be? How do you make that decision? You make that within the business?
What, as in who's designated to be that? So when I undertake a fire risk assessment, and this is a common mistake that people make, is they name a specific person as the responsible persons.
Right.
It's the business.
Right, okay.
The limited company or the management company, and then people get named in certain roles, as in general safety or establishing fire policies or in charge of health and safety on the site. That's how it works. So you're creating like a family tree of responsibility. It is the overall business that is the responsible persons.
Right, awesome. So if a customer then, we're saying nearly everybody out there who's got a business should have a risk assessment in place now. If you Google risk assessors, there's 1,000 different ones out there. They've all got different qualifications. They've all got different accreditations. Yeah. What should a customer really be looking for when they undertake looking for one?
So one of the big things I used to get frustrated with, I've always tried to have the right insurances, the right qualifications, belong to the right governing bodies. And that wasn't always the case with certain persons or companies that were undertaking fire risk assessments. And I was a real protester to say, look, why haven't we got a national fire risk assessors register, which identifies the right persons to do the right jobs, and they have the right, specifically, and this is a big issue, have the right insurances to cover that person to undertake those works. And one thing I belong to, which I'm a huge fan of, is the tiered fire risk assessors register under the Institute of Fire Safety Managers.
Right.
It went live about 8 or 9 years ago, and I was one of the first ones to jump on it. Number one, I liked having that feather in my cap to say I'm registered and accredited to do such works, and all my qualifications and my CPDs, which is essential to keep undertaking those works, are all displayed on that website. And it also shows the level of qualifications that you have and what type of risk of buildings you can undertake. So I was a huge promoter of that. And that is something that I would, if I was a business owner, that is something that I would jump on straight away.
So what was that called again?
It's the Tiered Fire Risk Assessors Register.
Right, okay. And but there's no legal obligation for risk assessors to put themselves on that list?
This is where you have to be very careful under law changes, and you can well imagine after Grenfell Tower, that huge disaster we had, things were found out, companies and certain persons that were working on site, how can I put this politely, may not have had the right qualifications to undertake those works.
Right, okay.
And that identified a huge flaw. And I think that flaw is covered by having someone registered. Yeah. And you have come back. You're employing a competent person. And we read this everywhere we go through, whether it's British standards, whether it's the Fire Safety Order, the Building Safety Act, the Fire Safety Act 2021, the Fire Safety Regulations England 2020. My God, it's a mouthful. But
the thing is, you know them all.
I know. My wife thinks I'm a bit of a saddo, but there you go. But I deem that as my job. And when I go onto a site and people ask me, I think my wife thinks I've got a photographic memory. Me having that knowledge and giving that to the customer, the end user, the client, and just saying straight away, Article 17 of the Fire Safety Order requires maintenance of this, and X, Y, and Z. Yeah. You're then instilling confidence into your customer, the client, that you have your understanding of your industry. Yeah. I think that's really important.
Because I think that's another grey area within our sector is the competent person, the responsible person, all that sort of stuff. The customers don't really actually know what that actually means.
It's having the right people with the right skills, the right qualifications, and the knowledge and experience. And
so if I was a customer now and I was Googling it, what should I be looking for? They should be on this tier register. Would it be a good start?
Yeah. So there are certain governing bodies you can belong to. So we have the Institute of Fire Safety Managers, as explained. We also have the Institution of Fire Engineers. They have their own governing body and people are qualified. We then have BAFE, SP205. And then to find all of those in one area, we have the fire safety sector, which you can go on. And that'll list every qualified and registered fire risk assessor in the country.
Right, okay. And they hold their qualifications and their experience and everything on there, and you can...
Because they will refer to...
You can then compare different people.
Correct. And you can then employ the right person to undertake the right risk for your business, because every business is different, every domestic property is different, and that depends on height on domestic properties as well. I know my limitations, what I stay away from, and that's where I sit, and I'm very happy.
So within that register, say I was had a little flower shop on the high street, or I had a tower block or something like that.
Yeah.
Would that give me the information I need to choose the right person for the right job?
This is the thing I like with the IFSM. Tiered Fire Risk Assessors Register. It shows the 3 tiers of where the risk assessors sit.
Right, okay.
So tier 1 would be a low risk building. So something like a small flower shop, a small domestic property with a small communal escape route. That would be perfect for tier 1. And you select one of those persons from there. I sit on tier 2, and that's my choice where I want to be within my range, and that's low to medium risk buildings.
Yeah.
So I can go up to medical centres, go to care homes. I can do domestic properties, and I choose to stay below 11 metres and below. And that's because I deem that as a higher risk when you go up to 18 metres and high.
Yeah.
With, high tall buildings with domestic properties. Or it could be something like a hospital, which is tier 3 high risk. Anything like that. And then you can go through this list of assessors and say, my business isn't high risk. I think it's low to medium, and you can select the assessor.
Right, okay. Yeah. And it's always worth having a few conversations with people to see how you...
Yeah.
And ask to see some work as well, see what report they get at the end of the day
and I'm quite happy. I will obviously take the company name off the assessment. I had it when I done work for Indesit when it was open in Yate, or some people call it Yate. And it's really important.
The posh people of Bristol.
The posh people, yes. My side of Yate. It's really essential to understand... they asked for some samples of my fire risk assessments, and when they actually looked at them, they said they hadn't seen so much detail in their previous risk assessments. Yeah. And I just said to the guy, Jerry, I was working with at the time, look, that would concern me if somebody hasn't picked up on that's an essential life protection system.
Yeah.
It's got to be right.
So if once you've then chose the right risk assessor for you, those 3 tiers, there are different types of risk assessment people can have?
Correct. And that's in domestic properties.
Right, okay.
So types 1 to 4 fire risk assessments. When you go to a commercial premises, you either do a destructive or non-destructive assessment. Right. That's what you do.
Can you explain those 2 terms?
Okay. So if I go to a site and I will give the customer the option, and I say, you require a fire risk assessment. Do you want me to come to site and be non-destructive? And that means I won't start tearing walls down or drilling holes or piercing anywhere. What I would use would be things like endoscopes. Right. So if I see any breaches in firewalls or in ceilings, I can put my endoscope in, and if I can see intrusions into the buildings, I then take photographs of that and use it as evidence that things haven't been sealed up properly, and it's a possibility of fire travelling through the building. Destructive, means non-destructive, I will use the endoscope. Destructive means I start taking architraves off of fire doors and drilling holes, and then it has a cost factor.
Yeah.
Because someone's got to make good the works that I've done.
Right. Okay.
But if I'm going to do a destructive assessment, the one thing I do ask for is an asbestos survey report.
Right. Yeah.
Because I don't want to start destroying things and then exposing some nasties.
Yeah. And that's the same you said about the domestic as well?
Yeah, so domestic, you have 4 different types. The most common that I would expect to be used on a domestic property would either be a type 1, and that would generally cover just the communal areas, and that's being non-destructive.
Right.
But the time I ask the customer, and this is just to cover myself, I will say to them, do you have all the certification of works carried out on that property? As in, do you have certificates of installation for the fire doors, the fire stopping, the fire
golden thread?
The golden thread, yeah. And then if you can provide me with evidence, then I will do a type 1 fire risk assessment of the domestic escape route.
Right.
If they can't produce that, then I will do a type 3, which is still non-domestic, still for domestic, but it's non-destructive. But I start going into flats.
Right, okay.
And I can gather a bit more evidence from both sides, from inside the escape route and inside the apartment. And that gives me a bit more of a thread to see what the building's kind of, how it's constructed and how it's maintained.
Yeah.
And that gives me a better insight into the building then.
Right, okay.
There are 2 other types. So you have type 1 and type 3, which is the general ones used in communal rented domestic properties. Type 2 is where I could go into the communal area and start being destructive, a bit like a type 1 communal only, but I start then making holes and tearing things off. And a type 4 is like a type 3 where I go into the flats, but I then start making holes. And
I'm glad you know all these.
Yeah, I know. I told you I'm a sado. It is. And you have to, when a good assessor, a good fire and safety consultant talks to the client, to the customer, to the landlord, to the leaseholder, freeholder, they should be asking these questions over the phones.
Right, okay.
And if they're not giving that information over, I would have a bit of a concern.
Right, okay.
If they're not asking those golden thread questions.
Right, okay. So when a customer's had this conversation with you on the phone, we're now agreeing that you're going to come and do my risk assessment. What do you want from me when you attend? Are you looking for site maps? Are you looking for plans? Are you looking for all the maintenance that's been carried out on boilers and that sort of stuff? So
I have disclaimers or nomenclatures. Very good word. Within my,
I'll look that up in a minute.
That sounded posh then, for a change. It's really essential that I get either fire strategies,
right,
the designs of the buildings, and I can then identify what are firewalls. And they are areas which give compartmentation of your building. And the reason why I ask for that is I go to a lot of sites where I find buildings that have fire doors in them, but the wall isn't fire rated.
Right.
So what would happen is, God forbid, if a fire broke out,
the wall would go before the door.
Yeah, the door would be there, but then you still have something to walk through, but the wall would be gone. And that's really important. I look for building designs. Another thing I ask for, which is a big thing, a huge thing now, and it's on the back of the Fire Safety Regulations England 2022, and it's one of the first laws that have ever crossed over from domestic properties into commercial. And one of the big things they are asking for now is a fire safety policy.
Right.
That is huge. And it's what you have in place, management and maintenance-wise, for your employees and that building.
Right.
And that is essential.
So explain what would be in that then. So are you talking about evacuation plans?
Yeah. Management, what you have in place, what type of fire alarm, how you activate it,
right, okay,
what kind of emergency plans you have in, pre, during and after fire. Yeah. That should be all stated within a fire safety policy. And as you can well imagine, and I turn up to a domestic property and I say, can I see a copy of your fire safety policy? And they go, what's one of those? Yeah. Then straight away I go, you haven't got one. Would you like me to help you? Because it's not just the risk assessor's job to find issues on the site. They are there to help as well. Mm-hmm. And that's a big thing. And whilst I'm on site, I also ask for the fire logbook, because that's another golden thread. It shows me not just how you're protecting your employees, but how you're managing your building, how you are testing the life protection systems. Mm-hmm. Because that's what they are, life safety systems, fire alarms, fire extinguishers, emergency lighting. You cannot just rely on someone turning up once, twice a year and maintaining them. Yeah. You should have ongoing tests and maintenance in place, which is Article 17 of the Fire Safety Order. I refer back to that a lot. And you're showing me how you're managing and maintaining your site. I also look for PEEP forms. Do you know what PEEP forms are, Paul?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
so.
When I look at people...
Explain to the customer what that is.
So we have beeps, feeps and peeps. And it sounds like a kiddies children's program. But PEEP it's a big thing now, because before we had a thing called the Disabled Discrimination Act. Yep. And then it changed to the Equalities Act 2010. And that's where we've had to bolster up the personal emergency evacuation plans. It's a backup plan for persons on site who may have physical, hearing, visual impairments, maybe even cognitive issues on site. But it doesn't have to be permanent. No. It's for people who have temporary issues. Now, you're in the fire training industry and you teach about fire wardens and fire, fire marshal training. So you talk to your delegates about having the right plans in place. You have to demonstrate how you're going to evacuate everyone from that building, including people with latter stages of pregnancy. They could be on medication. Yep. Now, I'm on medication, I'm on steroids for my lungs. And sometimes when I take them, I feel a little bit giddy and sick. And I have a legal duty, if I was an employee, to go to my director or health and safety manager and say, look, hi, Mike, got a bit of an issue. Every time I take these, I feel a little bit sick and giddy every now and then, but it wears off within 5 minutes. Yep. And I'd expect him to say, look, I'm just going to issue a temporary PEEP. And if it's getting worse, we can then analyse you through a PEEP. And you might need a buddy to help you escape. Yeah. A FEEP is a fire emergency evacuation plan that you should have in place. And a BEEP is a building emergency evacuation plan. So that could be bomb threats and things like that. So, I'd expect to see all of this in situ. Right. Okay. When I do get concerned and I turn up on site and I say, can I see your fire logbook? Can I see your FEEP, your BEEP, your PEEP? And can I see your fire policy? Yep. And I say, we don't have that in situ. I think to myself then, well, hang on a second. If you don't have that in place, what else? Do
you find a lot of small businesses that have grown quickly still think themselves as a small family business and don't realise that things change quite drastically as employees start to come on board and stuff?
And that's where you have to read your fire risk assessment very carefully, because within that there are certain review times that you have to look at. So I expect what I expect a fire officer to ask is, do you have an up-to-date fire policy? Yeah. And do you have an up-to-date fire risk assessment? Now, to me, up to date, I'd be looking at that annually to review it. And within that, within my assessments, I have nomenclatures, I use that word again, where I state in there that the review date will be 12 months' time. Right. Unless there's growth of employees. Yeah. Or you have expanded or made changes to that building. Yeah. And then
it's got to be a fluid document.
Correct. Yeah. And that may negate your old fire risk assessment because your risk factor has increased.
So just before we go into that a little bit, just one more thing about so would you also be asking customers to provide things like the hardwire electrical testing certificates, PAT testing, gas, all that sort of stuff as well?
Electrical equipment testing. Yes. I didn't want to pull you on that. I'm not that vicious, honestly. It is essential. So the fire management side of things, I ask for, first of all. When I get onto site, that's when I expect to see all your certification for your gas, your electrics, your portable electrical equipment. And even like the biggest thing I find on site that never get maintained is evacuation chairs. Yeah. Again, I refer back to Article 17. It's about maintenance. I had one the other week they bought 10 years ago and it's sat on the wall.
Dusty as hell.
Yeah, and I couldn't get the tracks to work.
Yeah.
It was seized up. That's when I get onto site and dig a little bit deeper to how you're managing your business. And then we can negate some of the risks then, because we're making things tolerable by having them inspected.
Right. So you're on site now. I've produced all the documents. What's the next thing for you guys? Would you need somebody to walk around with you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Absolutely. And that goes in my assessment.
Right.
It's the person consulted on site.
Yeah.
The assessor or the fire and safety consultant is only as good as the person he's taken round by.
Right, okay.
And I've had situations in the past and the fire officer's turned up and said, whoa, hang on a minute, I found this room and you haven't assessed it. And I said, I wasn't taken there.
Didn't know it existed.
Yeah. And I said, but if you go to page 4 of my fire risk assessment, it will tell you the areas I've assessed. Was it in there? And I've had one fire officer say, I haven't read that bit. There was a disclaimer underneath it, areas not assessed.
Yeah.
I couldn't get access to it at the time. You have to protect yourself. The same as the client protects themselves, the fire and safety consultant has to put things in the assessment to protect themselves as well. What I tend to do when I go on site, as explained before, I'm not there just to find issues. I'm there to find good things as well. And I like to go through it. So if I have all your testing records, I have your fire policy, I have your training records, and that's really essential about training your staff, not just for fire wardens, but also in the use of fire extinguishers. I go to lots of businesses, they just sit on the walls 9 times out of 10. But, under the provision of workplace equipment regulations, if you supply anything as an employer, then you have to be trained in its use. Yeah. And that's essential. They are pressurized cylinders. Yeah. People have to be trained in the use of them. So I look at all of that to be established before I even start walking around.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So when you're walking around stuff, you take photographs, you write reports?
Oh, absolutely. A photograph
tells 1,000 words.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes it's very hard to describe an area. So outside Mike's office, third left on the wall there. Whereas if I can relate to it and take a photograph of it and say, look, that's where the breach is behind that wall there. And they can say, oh, that's behind Mike's office. I know where that is. It's very hard to give descriptive. I've been walking around with some clients sometimes and I go, what area would you call this? And they say, well, if we take Mike's office on the corridor just before the fire exit, would that make sense to you? Absolutely. And that's where the photograph will back me up. Evidence is essential. And you can also show things like gaps on fire doors, breaches in firewalls. If the fire extinguishers haven't been serviced recently, you can take photographs of the service labels, and that's essential.
Because I've seen a lot of risk assessments lately where people have just pulled templates off of Google.
Yeah.
And
see a lot of those.
It's a tick box exercise, and there's no actual in-depth evidence of what's been found or anything along those lines.
I had a very similar issue the other day where a previous fire risk assessment was done, but it was done in-house. And all it said was fire doors were in place. It didn't say if there were 30-minute fire doors, 60-minute fire doors, 120, if there were metal fire doors. And when I turned up, they were 30-minute fire doors. They had no intumescent strips and smoke seals in them. And the gaps exceeded tolerances because there are designated gaps you can have on a fire door. They were all excessive. But the person who'd done it in-house, because without being rude, when you work for your own business or you're employed by someone, you turn up, you go to work, and you know this through fire training, we all put blinkers on. Yeah. And you don't see the things that a new independent pair of eyes might see.
Yeah, no, definitely. Now, before we go to talk, you bring up fire doors there. Lots of changes with fire door.
Yeah.
Lots of customers out there being approached for people to do fire door surveys.
Yeah.
And can I have your, without slandering or saying anything, can I have your opinion on it? Because from my point of view, from where I'm coming from, the risk assessor should be assessing the fire doors within the risk assessment.
Correct.
And the doors should be maintained to the standard that risk assessor then...
I expect people who are fire safety consultants or fire risk assessors to have knowledge within fire doors and have qualifications.
Yeah.
I do myself. and it's an expectation. The same with fire stopping. They need the knowledge, and they need to identify the issues. This is where one of the new laws really clarifies and identifies what should be done, especially with domestic properties. All doors, entrance doors that lead into a communal escape route, have to be fire integral for up to 30 minutes. Now, it does say in the Fire Safety Regulations England 2022, Sado,
That's why I've got you on, Steve.
to do in-house inspections yourself, as the management companies will expect. Make sure they close properly. But it does say, here we go, in Regulation 10 of that Fire Specific Act, if you do not have the skills to do that yourselves, then you employ somebody who's competent with those skills to help back you up and identify what the issues are. I expect a fire risk assessor or fire safety consultant to identify the issues. It's a real problem because I've, and I can see why you laugh while you said this, first of all. I've had a client who had 144 fire doors replaced. They were fire doors. But a company went in and said they were all inadequate and condemned. And 20-odd thousand pounds later, they were replaced. Very naughty. And I said, have you got any of these doors left? Yeah, I have them here. I measured them. They were 44 mil in thickness. They were solid doors. They just needed a bit of updating, a little bit of TLC, like new hinges, intumescent strips, and to sort the gaps out on the doors. That's all it needed. And someone's made a lot of money. It goes on in every industry. It does.
My big concern for our customers out there is, though, that there's lots of companies out there playing on their lack of knowledge in the subject.
Absolutely.
And I've been telling all my customers, if you get the right risk assessor in, the risk assessor will point you in the right direction of what you're looking for your doors without employing another company to come in and do that survey.
See, what your clients and your customers have to understand, there are things called nominal doors. So I do a lot of listed buildings around Bath, Cheltenham, and in Bristol, Clifton and Redland, where they're Georgian, Regency, Victorian listed buildings. And a lot of them, I had one the other day, they came with 55 mil thick teak doors. Now, they were never fire doors, but they're a solid teak door. It isn't going to go very far. They just needed smoke protection and the gap sorted out and a change in the ironmongery. And then what you have is you have a company go in who can do the works. They will certificate the works that have been done and say, we have attached X, Y, and Z to this British standard that will perform for up to 30 minutes and stop smoke and fire coming through. That's a nominal door. It doesn't have to be what they call an FD30 fire door. I can't change doors like that because they're part of the listing of the building. What I can do is advise them to get an expert in who has the qualifications and skills to upgrade those doors.
I'm finding it a lot with schools, and there's no money in the education system currently, but schools are being pounded by companies out there trying to sell them fire door stuff. So
it's a huge issue.
It is.
People don't think about doing maintenance on the doors. I accept if doors are too far gone, they're split, they're damaged, they're beyond repair, that's the time when you're going to need a fire door. If it's a case of just general maintenance, and what you should be doing is having a biannual visit by an expert to go in and have a look at those doors. And they might say after the first 6 months, the fire door's being installed, because a building moves every single day. That's what it does. You then have to allow for a tolerance to the fire door to be adjusted. Or you might get in schools where children go through and push the door and then it pushes the closer and stretches it. That's all about adjustment and ongoing maintenance. I refer back to Article 17 again. And if you have that in place, you are then controlling your fire doors.
Awesome. Right, so you've walked around the building, you've taken loads of photographs, you've written reports, you've had somebody with you at all times to show you every area of the building to do the risk assessment. What's the process after that? What sort of report are you producing for the customer?
So there are two different types of fire risk assessments. One which has been signed off is called PAS 79.1. That's a British standard for the layout and theory of fire risk assessments. PAS 79.2 is still going through the process of being signed off. Every time they submit it, it keeps getting changed by government. But it's a template I work from. It's going to be there or thereabouts. That's what I would look for within a fire risk assessment. Is it a PAS 79.1 document?
Right.
And then it is the strategic layout of how a fire risk assessment works. You're guaranteed that's the theory of how it's all laid out.
Right, okay. So within that, you literally just break down each individual area of the building,
Correct.
the risk linked to it.
Correct.
And then put recommendations in place if
And
things have to be done.
this is where we have to be specific within the fire risk assessment. Is it a risk or is it a hazard?
Yeah.
Risks generally is what would start a fire, ignite them. Hazards are generally created by us, right?
The people.
And we are incredible at it, as in chucking combustible materials in plant rooms, in boiler rooms, electrical intakes, wedging open fire doors.
Yeah.
We are amazing at it. And the beauty of having a fire hazard is that generally it virtually costs nothing to remove them.
Yeah.
Because if human beings create it, then we can take it away without much cost. The risk is a very difficult thing within a building because we can only make it tolerable to live with. Because the risk is always around us.
Yeah.
Electrics, gas, it's always there. It's when we allow portable heaters in the building. And you need to check with your business insurance of what type you can use and where you can have them and how far they have to be away from combustible materials because ultimately they're the ones who are going to be paying out.
Have you started to add in lithium battery safety into
Oh,
stuff
yes.
you do?
Oh, yes. I've got our first electric car.
Right.
I was a big doubter of it, first of all. I must admit, I'd never go back now. Again, it's about control.
Yeah.
The biggest problem I am finding, especially when I go to workplaces and domestic properties, are electric e-bikes and scooters.
Yeah.
Either being left on charging communal escape routes, especially in domestic properties, or being left next to fire exits in commercial buildings.
Yeah.
That's just a big no-no. It is a problem because as we get pushed more and more not to take our cars into city centre and go electric and do that, it's a big problem. A few of my clients now, especially with domestic properties, have built sheds outside to store them in, and that's really important. And if we can keep them a safe distance away and anything goes wrong, the heat radiation isn't going to affect our building. It becomes a standalone problem now.
Yeah. So I had a conversation with a customer this week because they've got lots of people, they rent flats out in London to people that need them and stuff, and a lot of their tenants have got electric bikes and scooters. And I just said the cost of a shed at the end of the garden compared to the cost of rehousing these people if there's something goes wrong, it's a no-brainer. But it's one of those things that they just...
It's a massive problem. And as the world changes and what we get driven to, literally, we have to try and compensate for that. One of my clients had a large fire 2 years ago, and it was from a lithium-ion battery left on charge overnight. Yeah. They're not designed for that kind of use. No. They're rapid charge batteries. They're not the old lead batteries which take about 8 hours to charge up. They're rapid charge because we're a huge demand society. Yeah. Same with our phones. I
think that's the easy example to give people is a mobile phone takes an hour and a half to charge, but we leave it on all night while we're in bed.
And your phone tells you not to charge it more than 100%. It's the same with my wife's electric car. It says generally charge it to 80% and only take it to 100% charge when you're going on long distance travel. Yeah. I'm very fortunate for where she works because she can charge it free of charge, which is nice, saving her husband lots on fuel. But it's essential. As things go on, as they have over the years, we have to incorporate what's going on within industries.
Right, good. Yeah, that's awesome. So the report comes through to the customer. Yep. You've signed the bottom, so you're taking responsibility for all that information. Yep. And if they, because the brigade can come in at any point.
Absolutely.
And then
don't need to notify you anymore.
No, and they can hand that document over to them, and everything should be in.
I must admit, in the last 5 or 6 months, I have met a couple of brilliant fire officers. Fantastic. They know exactly what they're looking for. They know how to identify the risk assessment, what to go through. Yeah. And they're a bit like me. They can quote the fire safety order off the back of their shoulder without even thinking about it. And they know. And they're going to go through it. And the first thing they'll say is, okay, that's either a really good fire risk assessment, or what I see a lot of, that's inadequate and insufficient, because certain things have not been identified within the fire risk assessment, and they could be primary risks. Yeah. If they see that, they will say, not happy with the fire risk assessment, so you're going to have to go and get another one. The other thing they might challenge you on is not undertaking the works within the fire risk assessment. Right, and that is in the Fire Safety Order 2005. It is a legal document, and it's identified risks and hazards within your property, not just to the property, but obviously ultimately to life. Yeah. And if you haven't undertook them, the worst situation is you can have an Article 31 served upon you, which is a prohibition order. And they'll give you a certain timescale to get those works completed and challenge you. You don't want that on your back, because then they will keep doing checks on you to make sure you've done the works. You don't want to get a situation, if you have your findings, if you have any concerns with them or don't know what to do, that's what your risk assessor is there for. Yeah. I say to my clients, you have X, Y, Z amount of months to call me at any stage and go through. If you have any issues with that report, I will come in and take you to the area that I've identified and highlight the issue. I've had lots of complaints from clients, from people who've undertaken risk assessments in the past and refused to get involved after. Right, okay. That is not the role of a fire risk assessor. Ultimately, you're taking duty of care for that risk assessment, then you've got a duty of care to your client to help them. That's essential.
So once that's all done, like you said, it should be done, then reviewed annually, or if anything changes. Because like one of our customers the other week, they went from like a gas power forklift to a lithium forklift. Even though it's a forklift, the risk is different.
The risk change.
The risk change. They have to have somebody in.
And you have to have different control measures in place. Yeah. You know, how long are you charging it for? Do we have to move stuff away? Yeah. Do we need barriers, bigger barrier, 6 to 10 meters space around it? Yeah. Everything changes within that risk assessment, because the risk level and your methodology, I love that word, of controlling that risk. And that's another thing I don't see in a lot of fire risk assessments, is your methodology of how they've come to that conclusion with the risk assessment. So that's a big thing to find in there. I know it's a lot of information to take in for your clients, but it's given them a sort of bit of a thought process, not to just pluck the first name they see off Google, because they're going to do it. I see it all the time. We can do a fire risk assessment for £99. Yeah. No, you can't. Right. It's impossible. To the cost to get someone qualified and have the right insurances and the qualifications and being accredited, yourself, you're accredited as well. It costs money. Yeah. Undertaking a risk assessment for £99, all I can promise you is one thing: you'll get £99 worth of value. Yeah. So just to do a bit of a summary then. So best place for customers to go is to the... So we have 3 or 4 options, but the easiest one is to go to the fire safety sector. Yeah. They will have a list from every governing body of every registered, qualified and accredited risk assessor in the country for your area.
And then you choose the correct one for your size business, for your tier.
Your level of risk.
Get a few quotes, have a few conversations, see if you've got the right person for what you're looking for.
Make sure they're asking you questions. Yeah. Square meterage, size of building, what risk do you have in there? How many employees do you have? Yeah. They can then designate what type of assessment they need to undertake. Yeah.
And then going forward, as a customer, be a little bit proactive, making sure you've put everything in place before the risk assessor gets there, and have all the documentation stuff ready.
Rome wasn't built in a day. Yeah. Things cost. Fire doors are really expensive now. That all happened on the back of COVID. As you know yourself, buying stock became really expensive. Yeah. We left the EU, and that means that's put a cost on things as well. Again, what I say to my clients is this: when you're having works done, make sure the people undertaking the works are competent like your fire risk assessor.
Okay.
And they can provide the right documentation and certification and give you peace of mind. If I go back and I say, and I'll give you a prime example, I went to a place the other day, I found about 14 breaches of the fire safety order. They'd done about 5 or 6 of them. And I said, who done the work on these fire doors? We did. And I said, it's still wrong.
Yeah.
And now you've messed the door up. You're going to have to buy new fire doors.
Yeah.
When someone's accredited and registered to do those works that they require, that does 2 things. It means the person undertakes the work is the duty holder, and they've certified it. So if it fails to work or it doesn't hold up, that's where the law stops with that person.
Yeah.
But it also gives the client peace of mind.
Yeah.
That's essential. You know yourself, you're an accredited company, you do things by the book, and you give a good standard of training and business to your clients, the end user. That's what I expect from people going onto sites. So when I go to a site, I will use my 31 years of knowledge to hand over to my clients.
Yeah.
And I expect the same from people going in, do work on fire alarms and fire extinguishers.
And then when you've done your reports over, that's a document for them to keep.
Yep.
And
my copy stays live for 5 years.
5 years, right? Yeah. Okay.
I don't have to keep paper anymore.
Yeah.
Combustible overload.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a problem. Everything's now in the air, ether.
Yeah.
That's where it belongs. But I keep a copy for 5 years, and that legally implicates me for 5 years.
Yeah. Now, is there anything during this chat that I've missed that you want to bring up linked to risk assessment? Is there anything out there that you think customers are being drawn into that shouldn't be drawn into? Or is there any things that you've seen out on the road that you think customers should maybe focus on a bit more?
I think the main thing, and I keep re-enhancing this, is using the right people with the right qualifications. Yeah. That's all I can say to people. And it is an issue. I know it's a cost, but what the end user has to remember is it is the fire safety consultant that is taking the litigation.
Yeah.
If he gets it wrong, he could end up in prison for 7 years. Right. So it has to be exact.
Yeah.
If the client has the risk assessment and does not undertake the works, it then gets thrown back at them.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't want to be in that position because there are no set fines anymore. It's unlimited fines. This is not fear-mongering or threatening people. It's the way the law works.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in this country, we haven't always been proactive. You know that when you do your fire training, people don't do the proactive things as fire wardens doing their checks.
Well, my big thing is, I say during my training, on a micro level, we have to trip over a box before we move it.
Yeah. And that's what happens. We have to have a disaster, whether it's King's Cross, whether it's Grenfell, whether it's Bradford City. We have to have a disaster to happen to give us the kick up the proverbial to make us do things. And then everyone then gets hit with the same naughty stick.
Yeah.
And whether you're a good landlord or not, which I'm not saying not everyone aren't, it's a case of we all get hit with the same stick.
Yeah.
It's there to protect you. It's there getting the right people in with the right knowledge to guide you, to help you with your business. What I say to people is, you are there to get these people in, to not only to protect your employees, it's to guarantee the future of your business. Yeah. If it all goes wrong and you don't have a decent fire risk assessment or don't have a risk assessment in place, it's not a good scenario to be in.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming today. I really appreciate it. I find that really beneficial. I know the guys listening and watching this video will do as well. I know you're really busy because you came in this morning and went, the phone hasn't stopped.
No, it's gone crazy again.
If people want to find you or want a little bit of advice linked to what you do in risk assessment stuff, where's the best place to get hold of you?
If you go onto my website, which is www.safetymattersbristol.com, all my information, my qualifications, what I undertake is on that website.
And if you just want to quiz him on a few British standards, he'll just just reel them off.
I will bore you to tears.
Right. Awesome thing. Thank you very much,
Paul.
Steve.
It's been
Appreciate
an absolute
it.
pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.